And now for more on this, our Chase team has reached Jonathan Malloy in Ottawa. He's a professor in the Department of Political Science at Carleton University, and he joins us now. Hello to you, Jonathan.
Hello.
All right, so the first thing I wanted to ask you is in terms of the results that we saw yesterday or early this morning, coming out very similar to what we experienced in 2019. Was there any real point, I guess one would say, to having the election when you see a very similar result or mandate from voters?
Well, no. I mean, people called this an unnecessary election, and when you look at the results, it's pretty clear that it was unnecessary. And the Prime Minister called it. He obviously thought he could get a majority. I'm not sure how much of even his party actually was enthusiastic about that. And it turned out again to be almost exactly the same. So I think be correctly accused of calling an unnecessary election, and he got back almost exactly what he had before.
And, I wonder what sort of factors led to us seeing very similar to what we saw previously. One would imagine that ahead of actually calling an election, you're talking to your strategists, you're polling the country, you're seeing whether or not you will get a majority mandate. So what were some of the factors that you believe may have been unforeseen?
Well, I think that the Liberals calculated that the Conservatives would be weaker than they were, and that Mr. O'Toole would not be as nimble as he was, because that's been the playbook. That was really the playbook in the last 2019 election when the Liberals went heavily after Andrew Scheer, and particularly his social conservatism in the party. And I think that must have been their calculation. I think I and a lot of other people were wondering, what exactly is the Liberal strategy here? They're not that ahead in the polls. Like what's going on? And I think they thought that the Conservatives would be fairly vulnerable. Frankly, Mr. O'Toole was pretty nimble. He did not get pinned down the way the Liberals kept trying, but they couldn't pin him down in gun control and things like that. And I think that was probably key to the entire Liberal strategy. And it didn't work for them. And as a result, Mr. O'Toole, didn't do any better than his predecessor. But again, I think that was the main Liberal strategy, was to capitalize on Conservative weakness, which was not actually there.
And so let's move to the Conservative leader then with Erin O'Toole. Given what we are seeing right now in terms of the results, and the fact that he really moved a little bit more to the center, really tried to distance himself. I'm not your father's Conservative Party, was sort of the attitude that we saw out on the campaign trail. Does he have a future with the party? He certainly, when he was making his concession speech, he said that we'll be here if there's another election called to bring the Conservatives to victory. Is that something that you think the party will want him to continue to do?
It's a really good question, and we don't know the answer. We might know the answer in the weeks ahead. But yeah, usually Canadian party leaders get one kick at the can. Mr. O'Toole had that, and particularly if they don't raise the party's prospects, then they're out. And Andrew Scheer he actually improved in the 2019 election, but that wasn't good enough for the party, and he got forced out after a few weeks. I think the difference between Erin O'Toole now and Andrew Scheer 2 years ago is that I think any debate about Erin O'Toole's leadership becomes a debate about the entire strategy and future of the party. Andrew Scheer did not represent a change in the Conservative Party strategy. He basically was a light version of Mr. Harper. O'Toole has really tried to drag the party into the political center, and he's promised that that's the route to victory. And so critics might say, well, look, you didn't deliver us victory here. We lost votes to the People's Party. We didn't win the government and stuff. O'Toole, you're out. Your whole strategy is wrong. But others might defend that, no, this is the growth strategy. The party has to stick with the strategy here. So the point being that it's actually less about Erin O'Toole's personal leadership style and more about the entire strategy and future of the party. And I think there's going to be some very, very vivid debates in the party over the next weeks and months about that. Again, it's less about O'Toole himself and more about the entire future of the party.
Right, so speaking about the strategy of the Conservatives, let's talk about Maxime Bernier. He didn't win a seat, but his party has more than tripled its support since the last election. Are you surprised by that?
Well, I'm not particularly surprised, given both that we saw that in the polls, and also because the People's Party has really has a key issue, which is vaccines and things related to COVID-19. The People's Party was around in the last election. They only got about 1.6% of the vote, so less than a third of what they had now. And it was partly because they didn't really have a galvanizing issue beyond sort of general xenophobia and skepticism, etc. But in this election, I mean, it's been about vaccines, basically, and social distancing and anything related to the COVID-19 pandemic and reactions to that. And that obviously brought a fair number of people together, still only about 5% of the population, or voting population, but that's a really galvanizing issue. So, Mr. Bernier, frankly, has really capitalized on that. It's something that's really brought a very otherwise disparate group of people together, is fighting against vaccines, fighting against social distancing and masks. And for better or for worse, it's a fairly coherent movement.
And on that same topic of the People's Party of Canada, I did want to ask whether or not you think that Erin O'Toole, the Conservatives, did enough to sort of reach out to PPC voters and what impact that actually had on the final tally.
I don't know. I mean, it'd be interesting if, as we dig into the data and as sort of analysts are able to really sort of do post-election surveys and things to try and match up, where did the PPC votes come from? Did they come from people who would have otherwise voted Conservative, or would they have not voted at all? Would they have voted for some other party? We're not really sure. I do think that Mr. O'Toole was distracted by the People's Party a lot. I think he was, even though he was trying to push the party to the center, he was trying to, I think, be conciliatory to not drive people to the People's Party too much, particularly, for example, in the way that Mr. O'Toole refused to ensure that all his candidates were vaccinated, something that the other major parties did. But I think Mr. O'Toole knew that was a red line for a lot of people that otherwise might go to the People's Party. And so he was very cautious about that. So I'd say that he was distracted by the People's Party. Whether or not the Conservatives actually lost votes to the People's Party, would these people have voted Conservative otherwise? We're not sure, but I think it was a big strategic distraction for Mr. O'Toole for sure.
And I finally do want to ask you about the Green Party and Green Party leader Annamie Paul. She lost her seat. There was a bit of a collapse, really, if you look at the seats for the party itself during the campaigning, the election results that we're seeing now. So where does the Green Party go from here?
It's hard to say. I think it certainly was a bad night for the Green Party. They've had a bad few months with all their internal struggles over the leader, and I think this really shows that the Green Party of Canada is structurally weak. That it's never really been a coherent political force. They've always sort of made up a lot of their policies. They haven't really had strong figures beyond Elizabeth May and now Annamie Paul, and it's not really a coherent political force. Unlike, say, the People's Party, which is, there's only really one person in the People's Party, it's Maxime Bernier. But everyone there's a clear collective sense there. For the Green Party was always a place for a lot of people to park their vote or park their support because they didn't like the three other major English Canadian parties. But as I think it's shown that the Green Party just was not sustainable. It has a lot of internal problems, and so they had a breakthrough through Kitchener Centre, but that was a very unusual set of circumstances. And overall, it was certainly a disastrous night for the party, and unfortunately for Ms. Paul as well.
And we do have to leave our discussion there for now. Thank you so much for your time today, Jonathan.
Well, thank you.
And Jonathan Malloy in Ottawa, he's a professor in the Department of Political Science at Carleton University.